Hi, my name is Stephanie, and this is This Reader's Life. I'm glad that you're here today. I've been working all week trying to get a video done, and I've had a cold. I probably still sound like I have a cold. I'm much better, but for a couple of days, all I did was cough, and videos when you're coughing are just no fun. So not for you, not for me, not for anybody. But anyway, while I was thinking about things I want to do and going through some stuff, I was looking at all of my different lists. So I've got lists of my Kindle books and a list of Audible books and a list of to be reads. And something I noticed that came up, because in some cases they were alphabetical, was I have a lot of authors named Elizabeth on my list. I've read a lot of books by women named Elizabeth, and I went through and picked out five of those that I've really enjoyed through the years. And so I'm going to talk about each one for just a few minutes. They're all just a little bit different. They've all been popular at different times or at and for different reasons. But I'm just going to go through them alphabetically since that's sort of how I discovered them. And we'll see what you all think. So I'm going to put my glasses on because I did take notes when you're going to talk about five of them. It's hard to keep them all separate in some ways. So Elizabeth Berg is the first one that I'm going to talk about, and she is an American writer. These are all American writers. She was born in 1948, which makes her about 77 or 78 years old now. She's written over 30 books, and she writes a lot. She writes mostly women's fiction, and she writes a lot about women in transition, women whose lives haven't turned out quite the way that they expected them to, or who are forced to accept kind of a change that they weren't expecting. Her books are very emotional. They're very engaging. They're honest. Um, they're pretty domestic because they're about women and women's daily lives, which tends to include some domestic life. I related to them a lot when I was a bit younger. I don't read her much anymore, although I will probably pick her up again. I just moved on to other things. The first book that I ever read by her was trilogy by a trilogy about um, a little girl named Katie Nash who has lost her mother, who just has her dad and her older sister. She's a military child, so they've moved around a lot. And the book that I read first was called Joy School. And the series is Durable Goods is the first book, Joy School is the middle book, and the last one is True to Form. All three of them are excellent books. And I fell in love with Elizabeth, well, besides falling in love with Katie Nash, who is such a wonderful protagonist. Um, I fell in love with Elizabeth Berg's writing. She really spoke to me at that time in my life, and she's written several other books. Critics find her a little bit sentimental, and she is just a little bit sentimental, and that might be kind of why I drifted away for a while. You can only you sort of get tired of that same sweetness or that same perfect ending, which is not to say all of her books end that way, but that feeling of perfection time and time again. Um, my favorite book other than Joy School, which I enjoyed probably more than any other book, she wrote Never Change, which is about a sort of a woman who was a wallflower in school, and it's still kind of a wallflower. She still just doesn't show up much. She's never married. She's 51. She's a nurse, and she is assigned to help take care of a man or to visit with a man who has a terminal illness, and she finds out that he has brain cancer. And when she goes to take care of him, she finds out that it's a gentleman who she went to high school with, who who she had a horrible crush on. He has no idea who she is because he didn't have a clue she would. I don't believe he knows her. They didn't know each other in high school, that's for sure. But they develop a relationship, and again, she's fully aware that he's terminal, as he is, and they sort of make a pact between them. And to me, that was one of the best books Elizabeth Berg ever wrote. And when I read the last page of that book was so striking to me, and touched me in a way that I I copied down the entire last page. I am not going to read it to you because it doesn't make sense to read the last page of a book to somebody. But I I gave it to my sister, and I told her someday I think when I'm gone, if I'm the first, that I would like to have this read at my funeral, and that's pretty that's a pretty big impact, I would say. But so Elizabeth Berg is easily one of my favorite writers. Um, the next one I'm going to talk about in our alphabetical journey is Elizabeth Gilbert. She's also an American writer, and she wrote a memoir in 2006 that was wildly popular called Eat, Pray, Love, which is sort of the story of how she handled herself and went on sort of a voyage of discovery and healing. In Eat, Pray, Love was the name of the book. And of course, the book was made into a movie that Julia Roberts was the star of. So I cannot imagine having a movie writing a book that someone comes and says, well, we're going to make a movie and about this story that I told about myself, and we're going to have Julia Roberts be the star. You'd certainly know you've done something right. But I enjoyed the movie. I enjoyed the book. My favorite part of Eat, Pray, Love, which is sort of the book is divided into that, is when she starts by going to Italy and sort of eats her way across Italy, and I enjoyed it so much. I'm a foodie, and I love Italian food. If anybody ever asks me, is there too much garlic in something? I'm like, are you kidding? How could that even happen? But anyway, that was Eat, Pray, Love is my favorite of her books. I also read another book by her called City of Girls, which is set in the 1940s. It's about a young girl who is sent to live with her aunt, and her aunt has a theater, and she's kind of kind of an eccentric and kind of a rule bender or a rule breaker, and it's the woman is the Vivian, I believe is her name in the book. She's quite young and she makes some mistakes, but she certainly learns a lot, and she's certainly challenged. It's sort of she gains some courage and she discovers herself in that book, and I enjoyed it. Gilbert also wrote The Signature of All Things. She's written 10 books, I think. All the Way to the River is another book that she wrote. And then she also wrote a biography about Eustace Conway, who was on a reality show called Mountain Men. And he's sort of a survivalist, naturalist. And the title of that book was The Last American Man. And I did start it. I haven't finished it, but it's sort of a book of probably every woman and every man's idea of sort of the perfect guy who is completely self-sufficient. So it's very enjoyable. Let's see, who is next? We've got number 3 alphabetically is Elizabeth Ogilvy. And I'm guessing that a lot of people have not heard of Elizabeth Ogilvy. She lived from 1917 to 2006. She wrote almost exclusively about Maine. She spent her childhood in Massachusetts, but they summered in Maine on an island, quite a bit, islands off of Maine. And she also eventually ended up living on an island called Gay Island for most of her life. And she lived there with a friend of hers and also her friend's husband. And she wrote most of her books there. And most of her books, like I said, they're based in Maine. They are very, very much about Maine lifestyle. She published her first book in 1944. She did a series of books that are called the Bennett's Island books. They are about an island and a family that lives there. And like I said, she published the first one in 1944. There's Storm Tide, there's High Tide at Noon, and there's Strawberries in the Sea. There's several different books that she wrote. She's access-wise, you can find her on Wikipedia, and all of her books are listed there along with her biography. She wrote a trilogy, a historical sort of a historical romance, historical fiction that was set in Scotland. Those are it's the Jenny series, Jenny trilogy, at least three of them. Um, she also wrote some young adult novels. The one that I read, there were a couple. One was called "Come Along and Bring Your Dory," and a dory is a type of boat. And I remember reading that. I also read Blueberry Summer, which takes on some pretty sophisticated dilemmas for a teenager. And then that the girl in that was named Cass, and there's another book about Cass called The Fabulous Year. And but anyway, Elizabeth Ogilvy. Um, a big part of the draw for me of her novels are that um, the setting is so much almost a character in her books, and she writes great characters and great dialogue. So that's my favorite things about Elizabeth Ogilvy. That's the third Elizabeth. The fourth Elizabeth is an author named Elizabeth Peters. She that was a pseudonym for her. She wrote a lot of her mysteries, um, her serial mysteries that involve art history, and Egyptology. She wrote most of those under Elizabeth Peters. She was born in 1927. She died in 2013. She also wrote under the name of Barbara Michaels. Her real name, not her pen name, was Barbara Mertz. She had a PhD in Egyptology, and she wrote some nonfiction books under her married name, Barbara Mertz. But the books that I loved that were by Elizabeth Peters, and I had almost forgotten about them, but there's a book of 6 or 7 related stories about a art historian who works at a museum, and they are all mysteries. And the girl's name, or the young woman's name, is Vicky Bliss. She is a 6 foot tall, beautiful blonde who takes no nonsense off of anyone, and I adored her books. Um, Elizabeth Peters can write a good mystery, and I didn't figure them out. And to me, that's a big deal in a mystery. And they were humorous. They were well written, and again, I couldn't figure the mystery out, which is unusual. I usually, about 2/3 through, you go, "Oh, I get it." Um, but I liked her books. Vicky Bliss is just a favorite character of mine from books. Kind of like she's not like at all, but kind of like a Miss Marple or Hercule Poirot. It's just a character that you fall for, and I love Vicky Bliss. She has a love interest throughout the series, and his name is John Smythe, I believe, and he is an art thief. So that it's kind of plays into most of her mysteries. It's really, really an interesting relationship, and I really like it. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth Elizabeth that I want to mention is, and almost everyone knows her, is Elizabeth Strout. She has written 10 books. She's an American writer. She was born in 1956. And the first book that I read, I think, was just about her first book, which was Amy and Isabel, which I really, really enjoyed that book. It was sort of a hard book, and the subject matter wasn't my favorite, but I still couldn't stop reading. I enjoyed that very much. And then the next thing that I read is Olive Kitteridge. And Olive Kitteridge is on my list of all-time, bar none, favorite novels. It is a series of stories that I simply devoured, and I was just appalled and amazed and amused, and I fell in love with Olive Kitteridge. She was such a horrible, awful, great person. I just love her, and she's sad, and she's relatable, and she's real, and she's also good, which she has such a heart for people, and is such a curmudgeon. I enjoy Olive Kitteridge more than I think any other character in any other book that I've ever read, with the possible exception of Scarlett O'Hara. But um, um, Elizabeth Strout has just written some really great books. She also wrote My Name is Lucy Barton, which sort of turned into a series, and she sort of drew several characters in. She put eventually. Um, there are people from Amy and Isabel that show up in Lucy Barton's books. There are people from the Burgess Boys. There are Olive Kitteridge shows up in the Lucy Barton books, and Lucy Barton is easily my least favorite character of all of her characters. I love Bob Burgess and I love Olive. They are like polar opposites. If you ever wanted to read about two different people who are basically good, but that are so different. She has a new book coming out in May. Elizabeth Strout does. It's called The Things We Never Say. And it, according to what I've read, the characters are all new. So I'll be kind of glad to put Lucy Barton to rest, but I'm anxious to read her new book. I am jealous of Elizabeth Strout. I would love to write, and if I could, I would love to write the way that she can write. Another one of her books was Abide with Me. I think it came after Amy and Isabel, and I loved Abide with Me, about a minister who has lost his wife, who has a young child. Again, it takes place in Maine. So Elizabeth Strout and Elizabeth Ogilvy both write pretty quite a bit about the state of Maine, and the atmosphere, the settings in both of them certainly play into it. And so those are the five, and I sort of came up with like my awards for each one, or my most valuable player or whatever. I will say that I found Elizabeth Berg to be the most relatable. I can relate to her women in transition and her emotional domestic stories. I like those. I like her for that reason. Elizabeth Strout, she's got such compassion for humanity and such hope for humanity, and she writes characters that aren't especially, sometimes not very likable, but they still speak to you, and you still have some concern for them. And so that's why I like Elizabeth Strout. I'm going to say that she is the most compassion for humanity. That's what she gets the prize for. Elizabeth Gilbert, I think her subjects are diverse. She moves around a lot. City of Girls is 1940s New York. She writes, of course, she wrote her memoir. She wrote a biography. I like her range. She has a wide range of subjects that she writes about. Elizabeth Peters, she writes a darn good mystery, and she certainly keeps you keeps you guessing. And I like the fact that the women that she wrote in the 70s were very independent and fun to read, and her humor. So that's those. Elizabeth Ogilvy is probably my favorite, and it's hard for me to say that she's a better writer than the others, but the stories she tells are so immersive, and it only takes a page or two to just fall in and to start to feel like you know these people, that you understand that one person's, you're going to know them because of their twinkly eyes, and the other person, you're going to know them because of the little white streak in their hair, and you're going to know when they walk out the door that there are roses on their left and daffodils on their right, and that it smells like pine, and that you can hear the waves crashing. And she's completely immersive. It's completely natural. She writes beautiful nature, great dialogue. You feel like you're in the room with the people, or in the field, or on the boat with the people that she writes about. So that's what I have to say about those five. Of course, there are lots of, I don't know, who are your favorite writers named Elizabeth? There's Elizabeth Gaskell. There's also Elizabeth McCracken. Probably many other Elizabeths, obviously. But these were the five that came up for me that I really, really enjoy writing or reading, and I wanted to talk about their writing. And so I'm curious to know if of the five, if you have a favorite, or if you think you might want to try Elizabeth Ogilvy. Her books are, you can find them on Kindle. I used to pick out ancient books that were falling apart, that had old bindings, and in the library when I first started reading her. The first book was published in 1944, long before I was born. But her books are very enjoyable. So I hope that you might think about trying her. And until the next video, I hope that you can be kind to yourself, be kind to others, be kind to the planet, and have a blessed day.